Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we'll examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. Among the issues that was magnified by the pandemic is how school leaders can provide teachers with meaningful professional development, especially with the constraints of finances, social distancing, and within the virtual environment. Add to that is the question of where does a school leader find the time to assess options to teach his staff? Today, we welcome a leading influencer in the world of professional development who, through her publication, The Main Idea, has provided school leaders and teachers alike with a Reader's Digest version of many of the books on leadership, culture, and change processes. She has also gone the extra step of providing suggestions on how to teach the main ideas of these books to the teams one leads. Let's welcome Brooklyn's own Jenn David-Lang to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that introduction.
It's really my pleasure to have you on. And like I said, we've known each other for some time because I subscribe to The Main Idea and have really benefited from it. When I was a school leader, I was able to utilize a lot of the suggestions for professional development and read some of the book summaries and then go back and get the books that I turned into full book clubs with my school, with my staff. So I'm very happy to be able to have this opportunity to speak with you today. But before we actually delve into any more information and get into today's class, let's find out a little bit more about you. How did you get to be where we are today?
I started right out of college. I created a nonprofit program that was called Summer Bridge, and now it's called Breakthrough in Providence, Rhode Island. And there are over 30 of these programs throughout the U.S. And when I was 22, I was training high school and college students to teach middle school students during the summer. And so I've always been thinking about professional development and professional learning. I've been a teacher in that special place we call middle school. I've taught both English and math, so I have some perspective from both sides. I know that's an odd combination. A number of years later, I got my principal certification, which we just found out, the same place where you were, Kevin, at Bank Street. And I have just always been attracted to how can I help school leaders do their job better. And so it started a number of years ago where I had a consulting job and someone wanted me to go through the zillions of books on his desk, give him the main ideas, and then give him ideas for training teachers. He was starting a new charter school. So what could we do with the ideas in the book to train teachers the 2 weeks before students came? And I realized that school leaders just didn't have the time that they would ideally like to go through all of the great education and leadership books out there. And that's where the idea for The Main Idea was born. What if I read a whole bunch of education and leadership books, choose the ones that school leaders should be reading that they would benefit from, and create an 8-page summary. But then in addition, school leaders often don't know how to translate the ideas from a book into practice, right? How do I use these ideas? How do I train my teachers or my leadership team or my English department in these ideas? So I would create professional development suggestions at the end of each summary. So you as a leader, here's how you could run a workshop. And sometimes I create PowerPoints as well. So I give you the PowerPoint, give you the ideas so that you can run your own professional learning sessions, because I do believe that the best professional learning happens in-house. It doesn't happen when you pay thousands of dollars to some expert who comes in and leaves, but really for you as a school leader to be running it yourself.
Let's explore that question for a moment, or that area for a moment, as far as where you find the best professional learning, the professional development ideas, because I've also believed that if you can keep professional learning in-house, then it's going to go a lot further, because one of the biggest questions or main questions that teachers seem to ask is, yeah, that looks great, but how is that going to work with my students?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you come up with, or how do you decide which books you're going to actually summarize?
That's a really great question. So I read a lot of them, and I only summarize the good ones, the ones that I think will help. And so basically, I'm looking for books that are not just, here's my individual opinion, but really have some type of research behind them. So there's some research, some evidence. I'm looking for books that are not, policy or history of education, but really practical books. So if I read this book, am I going to get an idea for what I can do in my school tomorrow, the next week, the next year? So very practical. And then also just books that are accessible and easy to read, because after working 14, 16 hours, it's very hard to pick up a 400-page dense and difficult book. So those usually the three criteria that I look for when I choose which books to summarize for school leaders.
I want to take you back a little bit, because you mentioned you got started in the Providence Summer Bridge program and creating that program. So how do you see, or how do you view the way that we do education? How has that changed since then?
It was a while ago, and back then I was also teaching. There really was not a lot of focus on professional learning within the school building. It was, send you out somewhere, go to, some workshops. Staff meetings were announcements. It was before even the internet. So, you couldn't even sit in a staff meeting and think to yourself, this could have been an email, because there wasn't much email or no email. So it was a very different time. Teams of teachers weren't working together. Teachers were really working in their own silos in isolation. It was in the 90s, so it was a very different time in education.
What do you see as some of the glaring educational issues that this pandemic has actually spotlighted?
Well, I think this pandemic has made us aware of a number of rifts and issues that have been there for a while. Certainly the biggest one is the inequities that are built into our systems. Everything from the money that some schools have and other schools do not, to the professional learning and the resources that some schools have and others don't, to the treatment of different students in terms of how teachers and policies are benefiting certain students and not others. So I think people have always been aware of it, but obviously the pandemic has just, as you said, shown us a spotlight on some of these glaring inequities. And
what would you say were some of your favorite books that you have summarized over the years?
Well, I don't like to play favorites. I don't like to play favorites. But, I like the books that have been written by real practitioners who have been in and are currently, in the field, so I like a lot of Paul Bambrick-Santoyo's books. I don't know if you've read, Leverage Leadership and now Leverage Leadership 2, and he wrote Driven by Data. But I think I have over 130, 140 book summaries on my website. And they really span everything from, how to improve your habits, to how do you improve literacy or math instruction, to how do you create change in a school, coaching, soft skills like listening, how to be a listening leader. That's a great book.
I was going to ask you if you only summarize education, specifically educational leadership books, or did you also look at other types of books as well?
I do leadership books as well. I just recently did a New York Times bestseller called Atomic Habits, which is a great book about how you can create very small changes, and these lead to large changes in your life, by James Clear. We did a great book, Thanks for the Feedback, by Sheila Heen and Doug Stone, which is all about giving feedback, not specifically in education, because there is a lot to learn from other fields as well.
I know you also do some things. You don't just do book summaries. So tell us some of the other services that you provide other than creating those book summaries.
Well, interestingly, on the topic of professional learning, I have thought for a number of years that it would be a very powerful professional learning experience if I brought together groups of school and district leaders virtually to meet regularly and to learn from each other. But I never did it. And then the pandemic struck. And within 3 weeks, I spoke to a colleague of mine and I said, we need to provide these groups. I think school leaders are going to be really hurting during this pandemic. So we put together what is called a mastermind. I didn't coin the term. There are masterminds out there for school leaders and also outside of the field of education. And basically, we have groups of 8 to 10 school leaders from all over the country who come together for 1 hour every other week for professional learning, coaching, feedback, reflection, and support. And we've been running these since the first week in April. So we got them up and running a couple of weeks after the pandemic really struck. So it's almost a year now. And these have been just the most fantastic forms of professional learning that I've been involved with. They check off a lot of what the research says works about professional learning. They're focused on people's problems of practice. They're ongoing. It's not just a one-time sit and get. We follow up. There's coaching, there's support, there's a social component, it's collaborative. It's not one person learning in isolation. We carve out time for reflection. So a lot of what Linda Darling-Hammond and colleagues and others have said about what works in professional learning, we do. The hour goes by very quickly. We usually start with some type of check-in, and then there's some type of new learning. So I'm big on summarizing. Let's say, actually, our next topic is professional learning. So I will look through a lot of my resources and often put together, or my partner will put together, a one-pager about professional learning. And then we don't ask participants to read it ahead of time. They come to the meeting, we do some check-in, and then we do some type of professional learning activity, and we give them time to read the one-pager live. So that way, everyone not only learns the content, but they are also learning a professional learning structure they could use in their school, or they could share the content in their school. And the hour always ends with one principal sharing his or her problem of practice. So something they're working on in their school that they could use help with. And we have a very tight protocol where the person presents the problem, and then that person has to shut up, which is very difficult for school leaders. And we all brainstorm ideas. And inevitably, that person walks away with pages of suggestions and ideas, but other people do too, because most school leaders share a lot of similar problems. And then we carve out time at the end for reflection, where people record on a shared Google Doc something they're going to take away, or some big thought. It's kind of a bastardized version of John Dewey, who said, "We don't learn by doing, but we learn by reflecting on doing." So we always carve out a little time. But yeah, these masterminds have been fantastic. So that's something else that I've been involved with.
And I can speak from experience on this. I'm sure it's really, really hard for school leaders to remain quiet, because as they present their problem of practice, one, they think that they're the only ones who are going through this, even though everybody else in the room is going through it as well to some extent. But two, they tend to take it very personally. So they're always wanting to defend something that happened, as opposed to just letting it know that, okay, this happened. Now let's see how we can deal with it. They're always coming up with a reason as to why it happened, and not really letting all the people in the room contribute their suggestions and their collective knowledge to help the situation move along. So how do you overcome that aspect of it to put those leaders at ease, to kind of force them to, okay, spill your guts and now sit back and be quiet about everything?
Well, there's sort of two parts, right? There's the vulnerability in sharing what's really going on. The problem with being the school leader or the district leader is you're at the top. So it's very hard to have colleagues that you can honestly share with. You don't necessarily feel comfortable sharing with your assistant principal or your teachers when there are problems. You may not feel comfortable going to your assistant superintendent or superintendent. So you really need some peers. And the truth is that school leaders get the least professional learning in the building, the least. They're always focusing on their teachers, but themselves. So to have a space devoid of anyone you work with who have a similar position to you across the country, I think that allows for some of the vulnerability and the sharing. And then in terms of getting school leaders to, listen to others, I think we try to share some protocols that they can use in their discussions with their teachers or their colleagues, something like the 5 Whys protocol. And we might go through that, and then the principal can bring that back and try that at his or her own school. Oh, here's a protocol which says who speaks when, and that really helps to ensure that airtime is shared and it's not just all the leader talk.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today is creator and curator of The Main Idea, Jenn David-Lang. We know that there have been a lot of schools that seem to have adopted culturally responsive curricula or trauma-informed practices. So do you know of any books I don't know if you can tell me off the top of your head, but have you reviewed and summarized books that will help in addressing these areas?
That's funny you say that, because I always send my summaries on the 15th of the month, and today is the 17th, I believe. So 2 days ago, I sent out a summary of Reclaiming Youth at Risk. Yep. I like this book because it doesn't just talk about, it's not like here's a program, do this program, but it gets at some underlying reasons why students who have experienced trauma may have experienced that trauma. And it also places the responsibility for addressing the trauma, not just in the hands of the very few social workers, guidance counselors at the school, but really with all adults in the building. So basically, they have a simple model where they say that they believe that students who have unmet needs are the ones who are experiencing a lot of behavior and psychological and other problems. That every student, really every human, has 4 basic needs. Needs for attachment, autonomy, mastery, and altruism. When those needs are not met, that's when you see some of this difficult behavior. And in schools, we're used to focusing on that behavior, right? And what do? We turn to punishment. We turn to discipline, or discipline as we understand it to mean punishment.
Yep.
So the authors are proposing, rather than jump to the behavior, which is really the symptom, let's go to the underlying cause. And that doesn't mean, looking at why student X or Y's father left, but really look at these needs. What if we provide a school culture where every student experiences attachment, belonging? What if we meet these needs individually for the student, but for the whole school? So I decided to summarize that this month because I don't think we have a narrow segment of our population that has experienced trauma. I think that we are going to find, because of the pandemic as well as other issues, our students are really hurting, and we're going to really have to deal with that. We can't just put that aside and say, let's continue with education as normal. And in fact, let's stuff a lot more learning in because everyone's so far behind. I think we are going to have to address these issues.
Yeah, when I saw that summary come out, and I got it myself just a couple of days ago, and I saw like you said, the 4 A's that came out as far as those unmet needs of, you mentioned attachment, achievement, autonomy, and altruism, it immediately put me in the mindset of Maslow. Because, of course, he said that the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that certain things, you're not going to be able to do certain things unless the basic needs are met. And so if students don't have that feeling of relationship, that feeling of attachment, they're going to be disconnected. If they don't have the feeling of that they can problem solve or be able to experience some level of success, they're going to give up easily. So it doesn't matter how much Carol Dweck you preach to them, they're going to still give up because they've never haven't felt what success feels like. If there's no autonomy to some level of self-control that they're taught, then they're going to feel helpless and they'll be very impulsive. And looking at all these, and then of course with the altruism, and I think that's where we run into a really big disconnect with our students, is the lack of empathy that we have among them. So I think this book, at least the summary that I've read that you put out there, and the book itself will help school leaders and teachers and probably even parents to help their children deal with, not necessarily overcome, but at least deal with these issues that they're facing and be able to finally talk about them to people who can help them.
Yeah, and I think that, people are sick of hearing about silver linings of the pandemic, and it's been very serious, and many of us have lost jobs and family members and much more. But with all crises, there has to be something that you take from it. And I think that because we're being forced to look at these non-academic needs that students have, I'm hoping that school leaders will keep that as part of their curriculum, their training, as time goes on, because you can't divorce those two. You said it's a focus on Maslow. I've seen all over Twitter, people write Maslow before Bloom, right? That we have to first deal with the basic needs for survival before we're dealing with, higher order thinking and all of those things. I mean, I think we can do both of them.
Oh, yeah.
But we have neglected it, and we have felt in schools like, this is the family's problem. This is not our problem. This is, kids come to school with these problems. Whereas it's just good education to create a classroom that has those 4 A's, right? Don't you want your students to have a sense of achievement? Of course, that's not some crazy SEL thing, of course we want students to have autonomy. Isn't that what learning is? Learning is not, sitting there with a teacher giving you. Learning is learning on your own.
Exactly.
At a certain point. So I think the 4 A's are just good practices for classroom climate anyway.
And I know that, or we've seen that things have become, or teaching has become really difficult in this virtual realm that we're working with right now. So talk to us a little bit about the 2-pager that you put out a little while ago about the 30 strategies to boost student achievement or engagement via Zoom. Because I know that's based on another book, and the name escapes me at the moment. But how did you come across that book, and what made you decide to glean what you did and provide that resource for educators?
It was a book actually written for professors on the higher education level. But when I read it, I felt like there were a lot of implications for secondary students and primary as well. As part of an assignment I gave my mastermind members, which was to shadow a student virtually for the day. I mean, as a good school leader, you should shadow a student in person for the day to really see what school is like through that student's eyes. So I said, do it virtually. So I did it with my daughter. And I was exhausted, the whole day. And not that things aren't super tough for teachers, but I was doing it through her eyes. And it was very hard to sit and have every Zoom class be, full Zoom class, no breakouts, 1 or 2 students speaking at a time. So this book just had some really simple strategies to engage students from, using the poll function, and it's not just for Zoom, any video platform, but use a poll so that you get 100% of the students answering rather than one student answering at a time. We used to do turn-in talks, and nobody does them. Of course, you can do turn-in talk. Just either put students into breakouts, or you could even have them in the chat, just chat with there's a way in the chat function to just chat with one other person. So really small shifts that don't ask teachers to go back to the drawing board, but take what worked from the in-person world. How did you increase engagement then? It wasn't by calling on one student at a time. It wasn't by, lecturing for 20 minutes. All the ideas that you had, do a mini lesson, give students a project, have students write, have every student take a whiteboard or a piece of paper and hold up their answer in front of the screen so that 100% of the students can respond. So just some simple ideas to increase student engagement as we are, entering March, and it's a long year, and our students need to be more engaged.
How can people get more information and find out more about the main idea and kind of get their own subscriptions to this publication? Sure.
They can find me at themainidea.net, and my email is there. You can see the books I've summarized. A subscription is not that much, $39 or $49 a year for over 130 books in the archives, about the price of a couple of books. And information about my mastermind is there. And I have some other one-pagers about how to lead during a crisis. So you can find that all there. And feel free to email me with any questions, too.
I can attest to not only the quality of the summaries that are put out there and the professional development ideas, but also it works. I've used them in the schools where I've been a leader and an administrator, and it's made all the difference with my staff. They've been able to meet particular needs. They felt like when they attended the professional development session, they all got something out of them because of how we broke them up, or we jigsawed, or we had different people doing different activities and things. So they were able to speak to one another. And how often does that really happen on a professional level for teachers to just kind of collaborate with each other, since many of them deal with the same students? So we might as well get them talking about those students and how to help those students and so forth. So I think, again, having these opportunities and structuring these opportunities intentionally, I think goes a long way when it comes to supporting not only our staff, but also the school leaders themselves. So again, I thank you for putting all this together.
No problem. And don't be intimidated. I think sometimes school leaders are a little intimidated about putting together professional learning opportunities for their staff. And it could just be taking a couple pages that you found to be powerful and sharing it with staff and having them read and discuss. It doesn't have to be so complicated.
I recently had the opportunity to share some insights on the direction of education with Kim Marshall. And I understand that you two have collaborated on several projects. So please share with our audience, the nature and direction of these projects.
Sure. Kim Marshall and I put together 2 books, the Best of the Marshall Memo, book 1 and 2. I summarize books, and Kim summarizes journal articles, and he has thousands of journal articles in his archives. So we picked 22 topics that we think the school leader would care most about, and we combed through his archives and chose the best 10 to 15 articles on each of those 22 topics and put them in 2 books, 11 in each book. So if you're interested in professional learning or literacy or coaching teachers, you can go to that chapter and there'll be 15 articles, 10 to 15 articles. And then also Kim and I, sometimes we provide on Zoom a live session where we focus on one of them. We call them chapter chats. So I think we've had 2 before, one about the topic on what makes learning stick, and one on social emotional learning in students. And we do an hour-long professional learning session online and give away the chapter for free.
For any administrators or even teachers out there listening, they should definitely join in one of those live sessions, not just for the clear learning that they're going to have, but also demonstration as a modeling of how you can do professional learning in a virtual setting, because the strategies that are employed there, again, are universal.
There's so much that we can learn online, and it doesn't have to be, boring webinar, someone's talking at you for an hour. I think it can be engaging. You can meet colleagues across the country, across the world. We've had people from other continents, and it can be engaging, and you can learn a lot. Even though we're a little tired of looking at screens, there are ways to make professional learning meaningful via the internet.
We'd like to thank our guest today, creator and curator of The Main Idea, Jenn David-Lang, for coming on today's show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the conversation, Kevin.
Once again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.